Today I'm going to show you how to do brakes better than they do at the dealership. So after the steel part, that's where the meat is on the pad. So you want to see at least 5-6 millimeters there, right? This is about 10-11 millimeters when the brake pad is brand new. So if you go down to, let's say, 2 millimeters, then it's obviously junk. Some pads, or most pads, they have a metal indicators. So when you get to that 2 millimeter mark, that metal indicator is gonna start touching the rotor, and obviously it's gonna start squeaking, right? But be careful, not all pads have that feature. Some pads, the indicator is removable. Some mechanics, when they install the brake pads, they may not bother putting those indicators on. It's extra work, right? Even though it takes 3 seconds. So yeah, that's how you check the brakes. Obviously, best way to check brakes is take the wheel off. Right, and you want to see, because sometimes on outside the rotor looks pretty nice and smooth, but when you look on the other side, you see a lot of deep rust, right? Okay, these calipers, they're called floating calipers. This is the most common, right? This is the cheaper version of brakes. This is the most common. Floating means that you have piston in the caliper only on one side. All right, and the caliper, the piston, when you step on the brake, the piston's coming off, putting pressure on the rotor, and it's floating on those pins. One pin on the top, one pin on the bottom, and it's floating on there. So if you put pressure on one side, it automatically is going to transfer pressure on the other side as well. So you should get even wear of the pads. However, over the time, if you run out of the grease, because obviously the pins have to be sliding freely back and forth, and under this boot, you should have a grease there. A lot of times the boot might get cracked over time, or you introduce some moisture inside, and you're gonna get corrosion. The pin can freeze. That means it will stop moving, and you're only gonna be getting pressure to only one side of the brake pad. So your brake pads might wear prematurely. So I highly recommend maybe after 10 or 20,000 miles, take the wheel off, take those 2 bolts off. You're basically gonna take the caliper off a little bit and slide out those pins, clean them, put a new fresh grease, and put it back together, right? That way you will prolong the life of your brakes, and you'll save money, because you don't have to replace the pins or the caliper in the worst case. You just gotta be careful not to use any grease. You wanna use disc brake caliper grease, right? Regular grease might have a protection only up to, let's say, 200-300 Fahrenheit, right? Those brakes can get 700 Fahrenheit hot, so you want to have a really high temperature, right? Usually like a synthetic brake grease, okay? It's a specialized grease. You can get it from any auto parts. I like to use this one from First Aid. It's not easy to get, but this one actually is for brake and caliper, and also it's a dielectric grease. So when you do your tune-up and you put that on the top of the electrode, you put a little bit of dielectric grease, right? So it helps with the corrosion and stuff like that. So I like that. That's basically two in one. All right, next, I like to use brake pads that have some ceramic material in them, so ceramic brake pads. because they're really low on noise. They're usually pretty quiet, and they don't dust your wheels as some other brake pads. If you go with a sport brake pad, some premium pads that have improved stopping power, you're gonna get dust a little more, okay? Now, if you get your brake pads, make sure you get it with the hardware. Most of the brake pads, they already come with this, but some of the cheaper ones, they don't, right? So make sure it comes with that. If it doesn't, you can buy it separately. Next, I like to use rotors. I don't bother cutting rotors because these rotors are already 5 years old. This car has 57,000 miles and it still has original brakes. I never changed them. And I already have a little vibration in the steering wheel, so I'm just gonna replace the rotors. So every time you resurface the rotors, you're taking some material off, right, from the rotor. So it's gonna be more prone to warpage and then shaking the steering wheel and stuff like that. So I prefer to get a new rotors. So went with the Duralast Gold because, as you can see, these babies are high heat treated with some special temperature coating, so they should last a lot longer. Usually you see the rotors are super rusty, especially when they have the cooling veins inside. That gets all filled with rust, and then after a while, you don't have the feature of the cooling of down the brakes, and your brakes might be overheating a little more than they used to, right? So if you get these kind of rotors that are painted, these will last a lot longer. Check the description. I'm gonna have links so you can check out where to get good deals on parts or tools. I have multiple sources, so you can even shop around. So first, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start with the lower bolt. I'm only gonna remove the lower bolt, okay? Now, because this is a Japanese car, you only gonna have either 12 or 14 millimeter bolts, sometimes even 17, right? So now I'm gonna open it up. Now I'm gonna slide my screwdriver down there. I'm gonna put it against, let's see if I can show you a little better. All right, so you're gonna take the bottom bolt off. Now, this caliper has, as you can see, I got 1, 2 pistons in there, right? So, I'm gonna put it back. Okay. I'm just gonna open it a little bit, put it. Now I'm gonna pull one end of the screwdriver behind the rotor, and with the other I'm gonna push the piston to go in. All right, like this. Good. Now I got one all the way in. Okay, you can see how one is all the way in. Okay, now I'm gonna do the same thing with the other one. Now from this one, you don't have to take out, all right? You just take one, now you lift it up and you just slide it. You just slide it, see? See, on this one, I got plenty of grease. I got plenty of grease there. So again, I'm gonna slide it in there. All right, you just take the bottom one out, lift it up and slide it out. All right, very easy, save you some time. Now see, you don't want to stress this rubber hose too much. So it is a good idea to have a like a wire hanger, and you can attach it to the coil, and then through the opening you can just hang it here, right? Or sometimes you can just hang it this way, put it on the cup of the strut. But you have to be super careful if you're gonna be back here losing those bolts for the caliper bracket. It might fall on your head, right? So you wanna make sure it's not gonna fall off. So you might put a rope around it or something. We're gonna take our 17. For these bracket bolts, it's usually a 17 or 19, right? If you got Japanese car. All right, put my gun here. See, like sometimes on this case, the strut bolt is too close. So I'm gonna have to use a regular wrench or short socket. Or if you have a swivel, half an inch swivel, you can use that. I left my 17mm wrench at work, so I had to take the bottom bolt for the strut out. And obviously I gotta leave this one in because this one is adjustable. I don't want to mess with it. So I just took the bottom one out, and now I can easily get the 17 with my gun. There we go. Now this comes off. As you can see, I still have a little bit of life left, but I already was getting little vibrations in the steering wheel when I was braking. And we're planning right after this COVID-19 fake stuff is gone, we want to do a little road trip. So we wanted to go away, but all the national parks are closed and everything, so we gotta stay here. All right, so now that we got the hardware off, now we gotta clean it, because usually there's a rust buildup underneath the hardware, so your pads can get seized right in here, because the rust is building up under the hardware like this. So you got the hardware in there, so the hardware is putting more and more pressure on the pad, and sometimes the pad can get seized, and the caliper has to work harder to squeeze those pads because they don't move freely. So what you have to do is take these off, then you get yourself a wire brush, right, and you clean that rust off. At work I'm using a power tool, like a die grinder with the sandpaper, and I'll just do it real quick that way. If you got some heavier buildup, you might want to use a screwdriver and just get that rust off. If it's heavy buildup, then obviously you're gonna need a power tool, like a die grinder. If it's not too bad, then the screwdriver, sandpaper, and wire brush are sufficient enough. All right, just clean real good. Both sides. Usually the top is not too bad. You see, there's not much rust there. It's always the bottom where the water sits, and the salt, and through the winter makes it even worse. And obviously I didn't take my die grinder from work here because I did not think I'm gonna do the brakes this weekend. But outside it's raining, so I can't go anywhere. So I might as well do the movie now. Help you guys out. Save some money. during this situation, so you don't have to bring your car to a dealer. Spent over 400 bucks on a brake job that you can do better with better parts for a lot less, right? You can save a couple $100 and have better parts. All right, that looks pretty good. Now sometimes I clean it even here. On the other side, that's where a lot of dust gets accumulated. All right, not too bad, not too bad. All right, so now it's time for anti-seize. We're gonna prep this bracket first. So I'm gonna put a little bit of anti-seize. Now this stuff is kind of nasty on your hands. It's kind of hard to wash, so make sure you wear gloves. All right, now we're gonna get the anti-seize in there so it doesn't rust as fast. It's gonna last a little bit longer because in factory they don't worry about these things, right? They want you to come back soon, right, to do your brake service. So now that we have that, now we're gonna grab our new brake hardware. Put a new one in there. It's more shiny. All right, good. Make sure it sits all the way, all right? Sometimes they have these stoppers at the end, so make sure they're all in the right place. Good. Make sure where the rotor is, that it doesn't stick out anywhere, so it won't make any noise. Some grinding noises and stuff, okay? So make sure you got it installed correctly, right in the center. All right, so I put this one actually wrong. That's because I work on Chrysler vehicles and it's always the same, right? Top, bottom, same thing. But on this Subaru, actually this one has to go on top. So we're gonna put this one on top. And now the bottom one, you see the difference? The bottom one has extra plates on the side. All right, so that goes on the bottom. There we go. And these plates, they're actually there for a reason. See this brake pad? This is the wear indicator. And this is the little, like a spring that puts that keeps the pad away from the rotor, basically. So that's gonna be sliding on the plate. See that? That's gonna be pushing against it. All right, it's pretty smart. All right, so now that we have that, now we're gonna put the grease on the pins. Actually, this is the top pin. Towel. I'm gonna take this grease off because we're gonna put brand new grease in there, okay? Good. Yeah, this one is nice and clean. A lot of times you get some rust in here and then you need to take that rust off on like a wire wheel. All right, this one is nice and clean. Good. Okay, put the boot back here. Now I'm gonna get my grease. I think I'm running out. Okay. I don't want any rust there. All right, put it back there. All right, this caliper is ready. Now we're gonna take the rotor off. And if you're gonna be replacing the rotor, then you can just hit here, get it break away from the rust. I normally hit over here, but then you're getting a chance of hitting the stud, making yourself more trouble, right? Replacing the studs later on. So you might just want to hit here. If you want to resurface the rotor, save it, then you're gonna have to hit over here. But you're risking hitting those studs, damaging those studs. What I like about Japanese cars, they make it a little easier. See, they got a little threaded hole here. So you just find a bolt. I think it's a 10 millimeter or 8 millimeter, and you run the bolt through it, and that's gonna push against the hub, forcing the rotor to come off. So I'm gonna put a little bit of penetrant in there, because obviously these threads were not used for a really long time. No, 5 years. All right, I'm gonna put my bolt there, and see what happens. Yeah, my compressor is dead. I'm gonna tighten it. And the rotor's out. Now this has become a special tool, right? You're gonna keep it in your toolbox for next time. And the other side. Okay, now this hub is not too bad for being nobody opened it for 4 or 5 years. See, these nuts and the axle, you can see a lot of rust on these, but what I did when I got this vehicle, when I was swapping the tires, that's the first thing I did. I cleaned and I spray painted, right? Nicely spray painted, and as you can see, it's still like new because I spray painted, so it doesn't rust as fast. So now same thing, I'm gonna grab a wire brush and I'm gonna clean the hub because I don't want any rust there. Right? If you got some kind of rust there, that make move your rotor slightly away, and your rotor might be a little shaking too. So you wanna make sure you don't have any rust there. Clean it the best you can. And now same thing, we're gonna apply anti-seize. All right, I like to put it just around it like this. And that way, if you have aluminum rims, they're not gonna seize to your hub. And when you're gonna do your tire rotations, it's gonna be really easy to take the wheel off. Sometimes at work, I do a lot of tire rotations, oil changes as well. And it's just a headache when you have to spend extra 5-10 minutes, you know, hammering out the wheels off because they're seized. There's a lot of like aluminum oxidize over time, especially when you got the road salts and stuff like that during the winter. And if you do this, that pretty much eliminates the problem. So, all right, beautiful, good. What's nice about those rotors also is because they're treated this way, they don't use any oils, so you don't have to worry about cleaning the rotors with some brake cleaner. Okay, you just slap it back on Now this is where the hole was on the rotor, so I'm gonna line it up again there. If the rotor is loose and you would have a hard time putting the brakes on because the rotor, you're fighting the rotor being loose and moving around, just put one lug nut on like this, so it will hold the rotor nice in place while you're putting the brakes here. Now you obviously want to keep the rotor as clean as you can, so once you install it, you can use a brake clean and wipe it down anyway, so it's nice and clean, so it's not contaminated with any grease, because that would affect the performance of the braking. Caliper bracket. I like to use my power tools, but most of the time I just use it to take bolts off. When I'm putting the bolts in, you know, some power tools might be stronger than the other, and you might over torque the bolts, and then you might have a hard time taking it off in the future because it's been over torqued. Or you might stress the bolts too much, and then, you know, it's just gonna give you problems. You might stretch the thread, so it's always better to do it by hand. Obviously, best way is find the proper torque specs and use a torque wrench. Okay, because you don't want anything getting loose, but at the same time you don't want it to over torque too. So if you don't have a couple years experience wrenching, I highly recommend getting a torque wrench, okay, and looking up the specs. If you can find the specs, you can go to any AutoZone, CarQuest, Napa, right, and it's no big deal for them to give you the specs, okay? Now it's time for our brake pads. So same thing, make sure the brake pads are not contaminated with your fingerprints, with your greasy fingers. Pay attention to these. So they got these springs. This is the spring that puts tension on the brake pads, and these are the wear indicators. So you want to make sure that they're all, I want to make sure they're all the same, in the same position. Okay, and you can see I got 2 on top and 2 on the bottom. Alright, so I'm gonna take one on the top and one on the bottom. The other one I'm gonna save for the other side. I'm gonna take them, do a little bit like that, so they will bed in faster. Okay, facing down, and I'm gonna install. Okay, one side, other side. Okay, see, make sure the pad is nice. It's got nice movement inside. You don't, if it's too seized, that means you still have rust between the shim and the bracket. All right, you got the pads in. Now I can release the caliper. Hopefully I got the pistons all the way in. Put a new one in. slide it in. Like so. Alright, so now some mechanics, they like to use a grease, either caliper grease or anti-seize, and coat the pad with the grease, right? I don't like doing that because then with the temperature, it can actually melt the grease and it can actually get on the bottom here, maybe even on the rotor. So you just want to put very little. What I do, I just do a little bit here, just where you see the rust on the pistons, and then a little bit on the back here on the caliper, right? Also, grease attracts a dirt, so then you have a dirt build up on the grease. So just use very small amounts. All right, push it in. I'm gonna squeeze this bottom caliper a little bit more. There, perfect. Okay. We got brand new brakes, and we pushed the pistons inside the caliper. We pushed them all the way in, so we forced all the brake fluid that was here in the caliper. We forced most of the brake fluid through the lines, through the brake hoses, through the lines, back into the brake reservoir. So now it's a great opportunity to flush out the brake fluid, okay? So all you need is a little hand pump or vacuum pump. In this case, I got myself a hand pump. You can use vacuum pump or you can use those fluid extractors. You're gonna put one end into a brake reservoir, the other you're gonna catch into some container, and you're just gonna pump, suck out the fluid from the reservoir, and then you're gonna fill it up back with a nice, fresh, clean brake fluid. After that, once the reservoir is full again, you're gonna open up the bleeders, and you're gonna have someone pumping the brakes, and you're gonna be catching all the fluid, and then you're gonna tell someone to hold the brake down, and then you can tighten the bleeders. That way you'll flush out the lines and the caliper, whatever's left in there. Alright, also one more important tip. Be careful on the dust shield, alright? That's behind the rotor. Be careful you don't bend it. If you bend it, that shield becomes too close to the rotor and you're gonna have some crazy noises. You know, you're gonna be like, what the hell is that? What did I do? So make sure when you like turning, let's say you're turning this to go on the other side, see, by accident you might bend the heat shield behind, all right, the dust shield. Okay, so be careful on that shield. A lot of times it can be rusted out on older cars, making it even easier to move. Even you just touch it, you barely touch it like this, and it might be already too close to the rotor. So if you got your cap kind of dirty, use a brake cleaner and spray around like so. Alright, then you can use a towel, shop towel, clean it around. You want to have it nice and clean. Because see, the thing about brake fluid is brake fluid can last a long time, as long as you don't introduce moisture to the brake fluid. So think about those humid days and you opening up the cap to check the fluid. That's a bad thing to do, right? Because you're introducing moisture to your brake fluid, and then moisture contaminating the brake fluid. That means some parts of water getting into your brake fluid, and on those hot days when you're gonna be coming down the hill, stepping on the brakes, the boiling point of the brake fluid goes down with the moisture, with the water content, and that's how you introduce bubbles into the brake fluid, because the brake fluid heats up and it might be kind of like a boiling and creating you know, mushy pedal and a soft pedal, and then if you don't take care of that, your brake fluid can cause troubles, as with the mushy pedal, soft pedal, and sometimes you might need to pump the brakes, you know, to stop the car and stuff like that. But those are extreme cases. So we're gonna keep the fluid nice and clean. So try not to opening up the cap at all. All right, that's why you wanna keep it clean. And you can take a flashlight. See, flash like that, and you can see exactly how much fluid you have there by putting your flashlight inside. All right, good. I already sucked all the fluid I could from the reservoir. You can see that there's still a lot of fluid left, so I'm just gonna top it off all the way to the max, and we're gonna start bleeding the brakes. So after I got the brake fluid topped off, I open the bleeder. Just open the bleeder and let the brake fluid bleed off on its own. I don't have to do anything. If you don't have any brake fluid coming off, you might want to step on the brake a couple times and just let it do its thing. We can put a hose in there. Right now I got only like a little elbow in there. I think I bought it years ago. I bought it with like a brake flush kit. Came with a little canister like this. So you put one end here and the other end goes in the vacuum pump, and you sucking the fluid out with the vacuum pump. No matter what, keep an eye on your brake fluid level. Right, if it goes to minimum, you need to fill it up. If you introduce air into the system, it's gonna be a headache to get rid of the air. So whatever you do, make sure you have always plenty of fluid in your reservoir. Alright, so I got the bleeder still bleeding. Brake fluid keeps dripping. I'm gonna top off the fluid, keep it full. Try not to spill the fluid because it eats the paint real easy. Right, I got a helper ready. Alright, so slowly step on the brake. Alright, now I'm gonna tighten it. Nice. Okay, release. Good. This side is done. Now we're gonna move to the back. So I've heard these stories that you should always start with the back, with the longest line. So that would be the rear right. Then you move to the rear left. Then you move to the front right and left front. But honestly, based on my experience, I've been doing it for over 25 years. Doesn't really matter if you only bleeding your brakes or flushing the fluid. All right, I'm gonna do these rear brakes a little different. So I'm gonna open the bleeder. All right, and start pumping. All right, you can see the fluid going through. And just keep pumping, yeah. Okay, how's the fluid look like? Looks pretty clear to me now. All right, hold. And you can release. And we're done. That was the last wheel.